Good morning. It is I, Dr. Jimmy, again, and I trust that you all have been quite furiously pondering with all of your imagination the meaning and mystery of Malcolm, a clue given to us by John Murdy for a maze coming up this upcoming haunt season at the 15th Halloween Horror Night event at Universal Studios Hollywood in California. And possibly, just possibly, it may also refer to a haunted house at our own Halloween Horror Nights event here in Orlando, the 24th annual Halloween Horror Night event at Universal Orlando Resort. Because Mike Aiello has been rather coy about that. Is it or isn't it? Not telling. Ooh, I think he might be messing with us. Of course he's messing with us. What else should he do at this time of year? Well, many have been furiously pondering this, including myself, posting various things around the world of the internet. A fellow named Owen Disney posted an interesting video, which I shall bring up because he mentioned something intriguing about a white mask, and I must bring that up. So a shout out to him, as I will touch on that momentarily. But first, let us cover the Malcolms that have gotten the most press, let us say. The Malcolms that are the lead suspects in our investigations into the meaning of Malcolm. The lead suspects being, of course, Malcolm McDowell, a venerable actor who has done all sorts of motion pictures and television productions over the decades of his career, nearly 50 years career, and the obvious being Halloween, Clockwork Orange, etc. But I covered all the films in question in my previous video, so I'm not going to do that now. But I will now mention those wonderful sprint ads he does with James Earl Jones. You know the ones I mean, where they do the dramatic readings of what people of emails and social network posts of teenage girls, for example, in a very dramatic and pompous way, which is quite funny to hear the totes McGoats. That might have something to do with it, I don't know, but I had to throw that in there. And then, of course, the other lead suspects are, of course, Malcolm in the Middle, the television situation comedy about the exploits of a young boy named Malcolm Wilkerson, I believe, and his siblings Francis, Reese, and Dewey, and his parents Hal and Lois, and all the fun things that happen in that house and at school, and all sorts of wild scenarios over the 7 seasons worth of a show of situation comedy. I do want to point out a couple of things from that program. The obvious being, of course, is that the actor who played Hal, a fellow named Cranston, most recently played Walter White, Heisenberg on the meth dealer in Breaking Bad, and much has been made of that. But I want to point out a couple of lines of dialogue given by Dewey, one of my favorite characters from the program, because of some of the lines that come up on the show, especially the one when Francis called home to find out how Aunt Helen had died, and little Dewey says, "Cats ate her face." "No, really, Dewey, how did she die?" "Cats ate her face." "Let me talk to Dad." "Hi, Francis. How you? Dad, what happened to Aunt Helen?" "Cats ate her face." Dewey knows more about it than I do. I like that bit. And also the bit when he's making a city out of Legos and tells his father how that only smart people be living in this city. And his father goes, "A utopia." And then Dewey mentions that there won't be any stupid people because stupid people are going to be ground up for food. And his dad goes, "A cannibal utopia." That could be that could be Cannibal Utopia. That could be it. Wait a minute, didn't Malcolm McDowell appear in Doomsday? No, they did that already. Okay, let's continue. The third leading Malcolm suspect is Malcolm X, the African-American civil rights activist who was assassinated in the 1960s. His birth name, or as he would say, slave name, was Malcolm Little. I don't know if that's significant, but I thought I'd mention it because some of you probably know nothing about history, and so you might not have known that. Then there is Ian Malcolm, the chaos theorist, portrayed by Jeff Goldblum in the motion pictures Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park: The Lost World. These are our leading suspects, and a lot has been made of those as potentially being the Malcolm in question. Now, before I move on, I must say that there are many other Malcolms that have potential and possibility, and I'm going to put these out to you now. Other Malcolms, besides the most obvious, that have extreme potential to being the Malcolm in question for the purposes of Murdy's cryptic clue. Now, first of all, getting back to Sir Owen Disney mentioning that Murdy had said, apparently, in an offhanded comment, that a famous white mask would be returning to the park. What could that mean? You know, Halloween being obvious, but they did that quite recently and quite well in the Life and Crimes of Michael Myers. Phantom of the Opera, perhaps? What does it mean, white mask? Well, thinking about Malcolm and white mask led me to one conclusion, which may be wrong, but probably is, because I don't see how we can really pull this off at Halloween Horror Nights, but intriguing nevertheless. One of the Malcolms that sprung to mind immediately for me is my ancestor, King Malcolm III of Scotland. I'm directly descended from him and his wife, Saint Margaret, Queen of Scotland. But what's significant about them is that they were used by the immortal bard William Shakespeare into his great tragic play, which I'm not going to name. We just call it the Scottish play. Yes, at one time Dr. Jimmy tread the boards, and as a former thespian, I still maintain some of those actually fears of evoking the name of the Scottish play out loud, especially in a theatrical presentation, which this sort of is, isn't it? So, sorry, I'm not going to say the word. Don't want any retaliation from supernatural forces. Like Bob. All right, but anyway, there's also an avant-garde adaptation of that play, retitled as Sleep No More. Sleep No More, an avant-garde interactive presentation based on Shakespeare's Scottish play, and is featured in the McLintock Hotel in New York City. Quite an amazing spectacle, variety of performances. You move from room to room and all sorts of weird things happen all around you. Sort of like one of those murder mystery dinner parties, but or a haunted house, or a play, all happening at once. A very strange thing, and quite wonderful. And the white mask makes me think of it, because at one point all the audience participants are made to wear these carnival plague doctor-like white masks. So that's a very interesting possibility. In addition, there are dozens more Malcolms. There's Malcolm McLaren, the impresario of pop music in Great Britain, who claimed to have invented punk rock when he founded the Sex Pistols back in the early 1970s. Also was one of the pioneers of hip-hop in Britain in the late 70s and early 80s. There is Malcolm Reynolds, the protagonist of the science fiction television program, an all too short-lived science fiction television program, Firefly, who was portrayed by Nathan Fillion, captain of the ship Serenity, I believe. There was Malcolm Johnson, character played by Marlon Wayans in the horror spoof, making fun of all those paranormal activities and Insidious and other films of that type, Conjurings and all of those. A film called A Haunted House, the sequel to which, A Haunted House 2, is coming out in April of this year, and it's a definite possibility as well, mocking all the various tropes of recent horror films. Then there was Malcolm Tucker. I believe Owen mentioned this in his video. Malcolm Tucker was the rather foul-mouthed character portrayed by Peter Capaldi in the British television programme In the Thick of It. And of course Peter Capaldi has recently been cast as the Doctor, the 12th Doctor, for the upcoming series of Doctor Who. The series, I mean season. They say series on the other side of the ocean. Instead of season, they say program rather than series. So it gets confusing, you think. Now, but that leads to Doctor Who possibilities, as was mentioned before. There's Malcolm Forbes. Malcolm Forbes is, of course, the late American billionaire who founded Forbes magazine, among other things, and is rumored and is reported, and most likely was, a closeted gay man. Although if you say that to his son, he will punch you, even when he's running for office, as happened when a reporter asked him about his father's private life, and instead of just saying no comment, he tried to hit the that doesn't really help you win your election, does it? Resorting to violence on camera. But Malcolm Forbes famously used Elizabeth Taylor as one of his beards, and also rode around on a motorcycle, and is an icon of the capitalists and Republican Party, even though they try to overlook the fact that he was gay. Sarah Malcolm, that's an 18th century murderess, notorious criminal figure, and it had a rather sensational trial in London back in the 1700s. Look her up. Malcolm Muggeridge. Malcolm Muggeridge was quite well known in the 70s. Other years he was a satirist, wrote some very funny articles and books, but also was devout Christian, and then wrote a lot about religious themes. And then we have next Malcolm Naden. Malcolm Naden was a notorious murderer and fugitive from justice in Australia in recent years. He became Australia's most wanted man until they finally located him in a little cabin out in the bush and finally captured him, and also had a rather notorious trial with quite a lot of attention in the media. And then we have Malcolm Freeberg, who is the somewhat hunky, shirtless contestant on the television program, reality competition program Survivor. So that leads to all sorts of possibilities that perhaps that might be the Malcolm in question. Maybe it'd be a reality show-based house, a Survivor-based house, you know, where they throw you off the island. Then there's Malcolm Merlin, the supervillain, an evil archer who fights against the heroic archer Green Arrow in the comic books, and in the television program Arrow on the CW is portrayed by John Barrowman, Captain Jack Harkness, yes. I don't know why. I was saying Hawkins. I was thinking of Treasure Island or something, I guess. Yes, Captain Jack Harkness himself, John Barrowman, who played Malcolm Merlin on that program. And there's another supervillain whose first name is Malcolm, although you may not know this because it's rarely mentioned, but the Monarch, the fluttering butterfly king on the Venture Brothers, his original name was Malcolm, and he was a little boy, and then he was lost in the woods and raised by butterflies. Oh yes. Then there's a fellow called James Malcolm Rymer. And who's James Malcolm Rymer? Well, he wrote he was a writer of penny dreadfuls. These were cheap chapter books written in London in the 19th century that were quite popular. In the early 19th century particularly, it cost a penny, and then you would read these lurid, sensational stories, many of which had to do with blood and murder, and that's why they were called dreadfuls, sort of precursors to video nasties. And they usually had rather lurid and sensational subject matter. And one of them was called, a little gem called Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street. That's where that came from. There might have been a historical person, but Rymer was the one who actually first put it down as in a fictional form and made it popular. He also did a little chapter novelizer called Varney the Vampire, which was one of the first major vampire books in the English language, and is a direct inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. So, that's a significant Malcolm indeed. All right. Now, I'd hoped to get this all done in one video, but obviously I can't. So, I shall continue in a second video to be posted at a later time. Thank you.